In the last program, I talked to you about life. Today, I'd like to talk to you about freedom. Now, the freedom I'm talking about has nothing to do with totalitarian regimes or prisons. The freedom I'm talking about is something else. There is this Japanese general that I read about once who was arrested by his enemies and thrown into prison. And the man knew that the next day he was going to be tortured. So he couldn't sleep. He kept tossing about in bed in his prison cell. And then suddenly, he came to a realization. He said, "When am I going to be tortured? Tomorrow." But tomorrow isn't real. That's what his Zen master had taught him. And the moment he realized this, he calmed down and fell asleep on the realization that the only real thing is now. So off to sleep he went. He was in prison, but he was a free man. The enemies to freedom are not outside of us. The enemies are here. The chains that bind us are here. And in this program, I want to talk to you about those chains. We're going to take them one at a time because there are quite a few. The first chain that binds us and prevents us from being free are the bad experiences of the past. That's easy enough to understand. You have someone who lost his mother when he was 8 years old, and he is so damaged and crippled by that experience that he won't come close to anyone anymore now. You have a woman who was sexually assaulted maybe when she was a child, and now she's afraid of all men. You have a man who was unjustly accused and thrown out of his job, and his whole life is poisoned by bitterness. See, bad experiences from the past. A woman who sees all the tremendous opportunities that are open to her children, and she regrets the fact that she was poor when she was a child and that she never had those opportunities, and she's full of complaints. Or I remember a friend of mine who was so guilty that he arrived late at the deathbed of his father. Somehow he couldn't forgive himself for that, even though he wasn't to blame. And every now and then the memory of that would come back and he would get all immobilized. So the first thing that chains us and prevents us from being free and alive are the bad experiences of the past. How would we break those chains? How would we become free again? Here is a simple exercise that I would like to offer you to get that. What you're going to need for it is faith and gratitude. Try this. If you realize that you are being influenced by one of these bad experiences of the past, then in a moment of peace and quiet, because you're going to need some time for this, don't do it when you're in a hurry now. In some time of peace and quiet, go back to that experience. Don't get immersed in it now. Stay away some distance from it, so to speak, and speak to the Lord. You could even imagine that the Lord is there next to you. And you say to him, "Lord, this is difficult, but I really believe, I trust that if you allowed this to happen, it was for my good. I may not be able to see the good, but I trust that it is there." Now do it gently. Don't be violent. Don't force yourself. Don't push. If you find you're revolting too much, all right, let it be, and go at it another day. That's important. In fact, what's likely to happen is, as you begin to do this, you might feel anger welling up within your heart. Well, get angry. It's all right. That's a good prayer. And the Lord appreciates that. He appreciates honesty. And then leave it for another day. See, this is something that's likely to take time because freedom isn't quickly achieved. Well, when you can find it in your heart to really say this to the Lord, that you believe that it is for your good, then you move on to the next step. Thank Him for it. And when you can really thank Him for it and thank Him for the good that He is going to draw out of it, you will be released. The chain will be broken. One chain less to tie you down. Another type of chain that ties us down inside, the good experiences of the past. Now, you will be a bit astonished to hear that, because good experiences are wonderful. In fact, it's even good occasionally to go back and relive them and be nourished by them again. But there is a danger there. You know what the danger is? That you might catch that disease called nostalgia. If you are suffering from nostalgia, you know what has happened to you? You've stopped living because you've abandoned the present. And there is something else that you're likely to do. You're likely to even destroy the present. Let me explain that. Let's suppose you had a lovely experience with a friend. You were sitting down with him, watching the sunset, and that was a marvelous experience. The next time you are with your friend, you go out to dinner, let's say, or you go for a stroll and talk. Now, you know what you are likely to do? You're likely to take that beautiful experience of the past, that experience of the sunset, and put it in a silver casket and carry it around with you. So while you are strolling with your friend, you sort of secretly open your silver casket and you take a look at it and you say, oh, this one is not as good as the past experience. You see what you've done? Thanks to that experience of the past, you destroyed the present. You're going to be less alive and less free. That beautiful experience of the past chains you down. How would you get rid of this? Here is what I suggest you do. Now, I'm warning you, this might be somewhat painful. Prayer can be painful, you know. To give birth to new life can be painful. So what do? Think of some of the people you loved in the past and who are no more with you, either because they are separated or because they have died. And you talk to each one of these people. You say something like this: how lucky I was that you came into my life. How grateful I am to you. I will love you always. And now, goodbye. I must go, because if I cling to you, I will not learn to love the present, and I will not learn to love the people I am with right now. So goodbye. You can see how painful that can be. And then you move on to some of those lovely experiences that you had in the past, and you personalize them, and you think of each one of them, and you say, how wonderful it was that I had you. I'm so grateful. And now, goodbye. That may be somewhat more painful, you know. And here comes one which some of you might find even more painful. You think of some of the possessions of the past, things that you treasured, like your youth, your strength, your good looks maybe, and you personalize them. Now, this may sound a little childish to some of you, but don't be afraid to be like a little child. You may find the kingdom. So you personalize this thing and you talk to it. You have a dialogue with it. And you say, how wonderful it was to have you. How grateful I am that I had you in my life. And now, goodbye. I must go. You know, lots of aging people never really live and never taste all the sweetness and depth and richness that old age brings, because they haven't let go of youth and strength and vitality. As the poet says so beautifully, the best is yet to be, the last of life for which the first was made. The best is yet to be. Many people miss out on the best period of life, their old age, because they are too centered on the past. They are enchained by the good experiences of the past. So that is two chains that we have dealt with that prevent us from being free. You know, a bird that is crippled and damaged cannot fly, but a bird that clings to the branch of a tree cannot fly either. So stop clinging to the past. The Hindus in my country, in India, have a very lovely saying, a very lovely religious saying. They say, water remains pure by flowing, the holy person remains pure by going. I put it this way, water remains sparkling and fresh and alive and free by flowing. You will remain that way by going. I love you. I am grateful to you. Goodbye. And now comes the third chain. And the third chain is anxieties and fears for the future. Remember that Japanese general I spoke to you about? Jesus is saying the same thing in more poetic language when he says, look at the birds of the air, look at the lilies of the field. They are not anxious. So don't be anxious, says Jesus. Now, easily said, but how hard to attain in reality. In fact, it's so wonderful to think that Jesus himself broke down before he died. Temporarily, he was depressed, he was anxious. And if we want to break that chain of anxiety for the future, we must do what Jesus himself did. What I recommend is take that fear that you have and talk to it, once again, as if it were a person. Lovingly now, no violence, because that fear is there mistakenly to protect you. So you talk to the fear and say, well, I understand why you are here, but it's all right. I'm going to trust the Lord. And you turn to the Lord and tell him that. And if you can find it in your heart to do this, thank him in advance for the outcome. That will be a great help. Thank the Lord for whatever is going to happen. The next inner chain that keeps us slaves also has to do with the future, ambitions. Now, to have ambition can be a wonderful thing, but to be enslaved by ambition, that's awful. People who are just driven by ambition, they don't even live. Now, there's no need to explain that. We all know people like this. What do you do if you happen to be the victim of this kind of ambition? Well, something similar. Stand in the presence of the Lord, make an act of faith that the future is in his hands, and you say something like this to him. You say, Lord, I trust that you are in control of the future. I'm going to do everything in my power to make my dreams come true, but I leave the result in your hands. And then you imagine that you let go, and you thank him ahead of time for the outcome. That will bring you a measure of peace and freedom. The next chain, you see, we are going pretty rapidly, one after the other. Clinging to present things. The human heart is a great clinger, and I don't have to tell you that because every human being experiences that. We become possessive of persons, of things. We don't want to be separated from them. We become dependent on them. We lose our freedom. And frequently, when there are persons involved, we don't leave them free either. Here is an exercise that I suggest to liberate our hearts from this kind of clinging. You take a person that you are deeply attached to, but so attached that you are dependent and possessive, and you don't want to let go. Again, talk to that person in imagination. Imagine the person is sitting there, right there in front of you, and you talk to the person. Talk lovingly. Tell the person what he or she means to you, and then add the following formula, which in the beginning you might find painful. And as I told you before, don't force yourself. If it is too painful, let it go. Come to it another time when you may be more ready. And the formula is this. You say, how precious you are to me, how dear and how lovely, but you are not my life. I have a life to live, a destiny to fulfill that is separate from you. Painful words, but so charged with grace and with life. And then you take things, you take places, you take occupations, things that are precious to you, and you find very hard to let go, so that they enslave you. And you say something similar to each one of them. How precious you are, but you are not my life. I have a life to live, a destiny to meet that is separate from you. And then say it to the things that are most intimate to you, things that are almost part of your being, your reputation, your health. Say it to life itself, which one day will be swallowed up in death. Say, how precious you are, how lovely, but you are not my life. I have a life to live and a destiny to meet that is separate from you. Hopefully, as a result of courageously saying this formula, you will attain to spiritual freedom. There is yet another chain that I have to speak of, but I am not going to name it right now. I will talk about it later. What I'm going to do now is give you an exercise, and then we will talk about this chain. Remember, we spoke about bad experiences of the past, good experiences of the past, future fears, future ambitions, present clinging, and now here comes what I consider to be the most powerful chain of all, the most difficult to break. Try this exercise. You may not be able to do it right now. You may need a little more time and peace in which to do it. But you are sitting there listening to me. Now think. What existed on this spot where I am sitting 100 years ago? Use your imagination. Go on. What existed on this spot 100 years ago? Then take a bigger leap and think or imagine what existed on this spot 3,000 years ago. Now that is 1,000 years before the birth of Jesus Christ, 3,000 years ago. And yet it is relatively recent history, you know, because scientists tell us that life has existed on this planet anywhere from 3 to 15 million years. Imagine that if you can. All right, so 3,000 years ago, what existed on this spot? And 3,000 years hence, what will exist on this spot on which I am sitting right now? Will there be a desert here? Will there be a jungle? Will there be another civilization? One thing you can be quite sure, if there are people there, they won't be talking your language, they won't have your customs, they will belong to another culture. No language has survived as a living language for 3,000 years. So try to imagine that. And then it is as if you come to earth 3,000 years hence, and you are searching for this place, and you're looking for any remains of your existence. Do that. And you know what will happen to you? You will experience a sense of vastness, a kind of a freeing sense. You know what you are being freed from? From delusion. The delusion of thinking that you matter. Because you know, except in the eyes of God, you and I do not really matter. We're not as important as we think. Think of one of those birds that Jesus speaks of. Think of one of those lilies, those flowers of the field that he speaks of. Think of a grain of sand. Think of a drop of water, a raindrop. Think of yourself. That is what you are. How insignificant. If you are able to do this exercise successfully, you will be liberated from the strongest tyranny of them all, which is the tyranny of the self. You will experience liberation, relief, and freedom. Because there is no one who is so free and so alive as the person who has accepted his or her death and his or her insignificance. The exercise will give you perspective and vastness. But as I said, you'll need time. You need 15 or 20 minutes to really get into it. Try it out when you have the time. Well, I was about to summarize this program for you, but before I do that, I want to give you one last exercise, which I call the mysterious exercise. And you'll soon see why it is mysterious. Simply because you won't see the connection in the beginning between this exercise that I'm going to give you and freedom. What is this mysterious exercise? It consists in the following. Get in touch with the sensations that you experience in your body. The way I told you to when I talked about peace, remember? All right, so get in touch with those sensations in your body. And after you've done this for a while, be aware of the one who is observing those sensations. And say internally, say, I am not those sensations. I am not this body. Then be aware of your thinking, those thoughts that keep going around in your mind. And after a while, turn your attention to the one who is observing the thoughts and say, I am not these thoughts, or I am not my thoughts. And then become aware of your feelings, or recall some feelings that you have had in the past, especially in the recent past, anxiety, depression, guilt, whatever. And after a while, turn your attention to the one who is observing those feelings, or the one who is recalling the feelings. And you say, I am not these feelings. I am not my feelings. You say you are anxious, but that is because you have identified with your anxiety. I am not the anxiety. You say you are depressed, Don't identify with the depression. I am not the depression. I call this a mysterious exercise. It is one of the great spiritual exercises that is given in the East. Mysterious because you don't notice the result immediately, but it has its effect unfailingly, and it breaks that deepest of all the chains that I called a little while ago, the chain of delusion, the tyranny of the self. To summarize then, I have given you quite a few exercises in this program. In the next one, I will be talking about love, which again is related to life and related to freedom. What I would suggest at the end of this program is that you stay there, as I have exhorted you to do in all of these programs. Be silent for a few minutes. Stay in your chairs and practice any of the exercise that I suggested and that appealed to you. I've given you 2 exercises that I would call long-term exercises. The one on perspective, remember, like 3,000 years ago, 3,000 years hence, that one. And the second long-term exercise, this mysterious one, I am not my feelings, I am not my thoughts, etc. And then I have given you a number of other exercises to deal with your slavery, with those chains on a short-term basis, so to speak. Well, before I end, let me tell you one last story. It is the story again of a free person. It's a story of a girl in a fishing village who became an unwed mother, and her parents beat her till the girl confessed who the father was. She said it was the master, the Zen master, living in that temple outside the village. The parents were indignant, and so were all the villagers, and they trooped to the temple after that baby was born. They took the baby with them and placed the baby there before the Zen master, and they said, "You hypocrite, this child is yours, you look after it." And all that the master said was, "Very well, very well." And he picked up the baby and he gave it to one of the women in the village to look after at his expense. Well, after this, the master had lost his reputation. His disciples abandoned him. No one went to consult him. And this went on for some months. When the girl saw this, she could take it no longer. And so she finally blurted out the truth. The father of that child was really not the master. It was a boy living next door. Well, when the parents heard that, they and the rest of the villagers rushed to the temple. They prostrated themselves in front of the master. They begged his pardon, and they asked to have the baby back. And the master gave them the baby back. And all he said was, "Oh, very well, very well." There is a free person. A person who is capable of suffering, but has attained that perspective that I was talking to you about. My wish for you and for me is that as a result of our poor efforts, God will give us this gift